Is the seasonal transition starting? I am Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, August 18th.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and ring the bell. You'll get automatic notifications when the videos are posted, typically on Sunday evenings. If you have a question or a comment or a concern, write it up down below. We'd be happy to respond. And if you'd like to make a contribution to the cause, hit the super thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. And with that, I'd like to thank the folks that donated last week. Evolution Moto, Tim Caston, Coach Nate, generous contribution, Coach, too. Appreciate it. These are all longtime viewers and contributors, and without their generous donations, it would make the channel a little bit more difficult to keep going. So I do really appreciate your support. And with that, let's get to work. We'll start by looking at significant wave heights, not just for the Pacific, but for the entire planet. And there is a fair amount of activity going on, most of it focused in the south, but there is some activity in the north, and pretty seasonally consistent. But let's start first in the South Pacific. A gale is trying to develop southeast of New Zealand, producing 22 or 23 foot seas, not of any particular interest at this moment, but come tomorrow on Monday, that should be doing something of way more interest to the folks in California and Hawaii, and of course down into South America and Central America. In the Indian Ocean, 20-foot seas, nothing too impressive. But in the South Atlantic, another gale with 26-foot seas pushing under the southern tip of South Africa. It has been a virtual storm-making or swell-producing machine in the South Atlantic for weeks now, and that continues. Now also in the Atlantic, tropical, I think it's still Hurricane Ernesto, pushing off to the northeast. It has produced swell that hit Florida and the mid-Atlantic states up into the northeast. Rideable waves, maybe even into the shoulder to head high range, something like that in Florida a day or so ago. And even as of this morning, there was still decent surf. And then a tropical storm Ampele in the, I guess this would be the Northwest Pacific, producing what looks like to be nearly 40-foot seas, and we'll dive into that in a little bit too. Notice it is recurving to the northeast. We'll talk some about that. All right, let's get into the details. We're going to start by looking at current conditions. We're going to start in Northern California, looking at the buoys. The Point Sur buoy, buoy number 157 off of Monterey Bay, a little bit south there, off the Monterey Peninsula. We're looking at all the energy that's hitting that buoy all the way up from 33.3 second period, super long period energy, which there is none, the whole way down to 5 second period, just pure wind chop. We look for the bumps or the humps, and we see there is some sort of a swell hitting at somewhere around 17 with a 17-second period. These numbers here are the height in feet of the energy in each of the energy bands. So 1 foot at 18 seconds, 1.1 feet at 16.7 seconds. But is the energy, all the energy under the curve that is more or less summed together to give you the actual swell height there. We got some fancy math that helps us do that so we don't have to figure it out. And then here, another area of wind swell in the 8 to 9 second period range. Here's the math, or the results of the math I was talking about. Primary swell, 1.8 feet at 16.7 seconds from 194 degrees. That would make surf theoretically 3 feet, but you can add a little bit more at a good bathymetric enhanced break, so maybe chest high surf, something like that. And then this wind swell of 3.2 feet at 8 seconds from 289 degrees, 2.5 feet, and that's probably about right. Then we go to Southern California off of San Diego, the Point Loma South buoy, number 191. This is just, I use it because it's the furthest south. It hits pretty much all of Southern California, and it's unobstructed by the Channel Islands or any other shoaling or anything else going down in that area. Basically the same profile. Here is that southern hemi swell period in the 16.5 seconds or 6 second period, and then some lesser wind swell. Most of the wind swell, what little of it there is being blocked by the Channel Islands. Primary swell 1.8 feet at 16 seconds from 192 degrees. That's surf at 2.8 feet, but at top spots it's almost double that. And secondary swell 1.4 feet at 12.7 seconds. That's more of a math error. This isn't even showing the wind swell. It just doesn't even qualify. And then finally, we go over to the south shore of, the Hawaiian Islands. We're using Lanai because it's pretty protected from any wind swell. Buoy number 239. Again, a smaller swell profile, a little bit of energy at 18 seconds, a little bit at 12, and some wind swell mixed in there, but nothing even up to 1 foot. That's not very suggestive of any major swell. Primary swell 1.5 feet, 8.8 seconds from 175 degrees, or 1.3 foot surf, and then another little bit of energy at 1 foot at 12.4 seconds from 196 degrees. I mean, all said and done, we're talking thigh high, maybe waist high sets at top spots. All right, so what's going on in the South Pacific, and not what is going on now? We're actually going back in time to Thursday, the 8th of August. Why so far back? Well, a gale developed southeast of New Zealand, producing 28-foot seas, building to, this shows 42 feet. Right here, that's the highest seas over this entire domain here. And here's the position, 60.5 south, 162.25 west, or right there. But a satellite made a pass over there, confirmed seas at about 48 feet, a 15 reading average, with one peak reading to 52 feet. This is the gale, and we'll just roll this out here so you can see how it evolved through Friday into Saturday, the 10th of August. This is the gale that, big seas, but radiating up north, it would have been like 80 degrees off axis. So actually the swell is bigger than even the models thought it would be. So you saw what it was on the buoys. And there's rideable surf if you have nothing better to do. It's not super great, but there is something rideable. And that's the origins of that swell. Now we're going on through, there is this other gale here on Sunday. This is a week ago, the 11th of August, with 43-foot seas. It was falling southeast, nothing for us. That was mainly a South American storm. Now another gale developed. In fact, let's go back right here to on Monday night, the 12th of August, lifting northeast along New Zealand, 23-foot seas, building to 24 feet, maybe 25 feet, somewhere buried in there, and then fading into Wednesday. This system has produced swell, which theoretically is supposed to start hitting Hawaii, South Shores of Hawaii, like now. We didn't see anything really obvious on the buoys, or some very small energy. I think maybe more into Monday and Tuesday we'll see whatever that system produces, but maybe, some fun little surf for the South Shore of the Hawaiian Islands. Then we'll roll this out a little bit further, see what, if anything else has been happening, and by and large, it's been pretty quiet. Yes, there's a gale, but it's pushing due south. That does nothing for us. And here's current time, the beginnings of something showing here southeast of New Zealand. Then making a quick look over the past week, starting Sunday, August 11th, in the South Atlantic Ocean. This is all relative to, let's say, Jeffreys Bay, Dungeons Bay, that area. Gale developed here off of South America, producing 28-foot seas, 29-foot seas. But of more interest was about midweek, this broader system with 33-foot seas, building to 34 feet, just raking the South African coast, pushing up along the southeast coast there. Seas quite high, pushing away on Thursday. Another system building off to the southwest of South Africa with 28 to 29-foot seas on Friday, building to 32 feet into almost Saturday, the 17th of August. That was yesterday. And this system now passing south of South Africa, yet generating more swell. The Indian Ocean with a little bit quieter pattern. We're only going back to Tuesday, the 13th of August. A gale developed producing 36-foot seas. Oh, that built to, what'd we get there? 41-foot seas over a small area. Not a giant system, but that's making swell relative to Bali and Mentawai Islands in West Australia. The next system pushing under Africa on Thursday, producing 33 to almost 34-foot seas, and it doing its usual traverse across the South Indian Ocean. And then here we are currently with a quieter pattern, but swell in the water. So let's do a little bit deeper dive for the South Pacific Ocean. We're going to look at the forecast. What's coming up for the next week? We're starting with Jetstream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet. Help support the formation of gales when those gales form. Help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a push in the jet to the north. So here is New Zealand, Australia here. Down here is Antarctica. The Ross Ice Shelf and Antarctic ice goes up to about 65 south. So a lot of this, if you have ice, you can't get winds to get traction on the ocean surface and nothing happens. But we do have a trough here, and pushing to the north, what that helps do is create an eddy, a clockwise flow aloft and down at the ocean surface. That is low pressure. That is clockwise circulation in the southern hemi. And of course, low pressure, if it's strong enough, generates winds. Those winds get traction on the ocean surface, impart energy to the ocean in the forms of creating seas. Those seas eventually start radiating off to the north. The lesser period elements of those seas fade off, exposing longer period swell. Of course, swell when it hits your beach turns into surf. So we have a trough and some potential. But here over the southeast Pacific, the jet is pushing south. All that does is split the jet like there and there. That creates high pressure, and that does nothing for storm production. So our trough continues off just east of New Zealand Monday into Tuesday and tries to resurge a little bit on Wednesday, but probably not enough. And then look at this on Wednesday. You get this. It's the opposite, a ridge pushing south. The jet really splits here, and then that does not bode well. It sweeps the whole way across, even over Antarctic ice, does nothing for storm production. And you go, and just like the titles say, well, are we looking at that point where we start looking north and the southern hemi starts shutting down? And one would say, well, maybe, until you get to the last frame here, 180 hours out, almost looks like another trough potentially forecast. So we'll have to see. But it seems like after July, about mid-July, the pattern of storms, they're still really focused under New Zealand, and as one would expect after a El Nino winter, but they seem to be getting continuously weaker and weaker. So then we go down and look at surface level pressure and surface level winds. It does take wind blowing on the ocean's surface to produce actual seas and swell. And we see here surface level pressure, surface level wind, 35-knot winds aimed off to the north, pretty much impacting New Zealand directly. And here's 40-knot winds or 45-knot winds. They're all aimed due south. Penguin storm, nothing for us. But we know the systems will start tracking off to the east. And here we go, even by Sunday evening, the 18th of August, 40-knot winds starting to become exposed southeast of New Zealand, aimed off to the north, building more as we get into Monday morning. And there we have a reasonable fetch area, likely going to get some traction, continuing as we get through the day Monday, but then sort of falling south. Most of the fetch becomes more encased over in the northeast quadrant of the storm, aimed south, and that's the end of that. Now we continue on out. Here's another system. Here's that high pressure nestled right between the split jet stream that's supposed to be setting up on Wednesday into Thursday. South winds, just really no real obvious storm or swell producing fetch forecast. I'm just looking for anything here that's sort of aimed off to the northeast. Here we are, 180 hours out, 35-knot winds. That's not enough. You get a 13-second period swell from that, and it'll be, yeah, maybe a dribble for Hawaii, but anywhere else up into the U.S. mainland, it's just going to be decayed to nothing. All right, so the winds and what is their effect on the ocean surface? Well, here we go, the forecast from the GFS wave model. So we get into Monday morning, 26-foot seas aimed off to the northeast. Easy seas aimed south. The easy seas aimed south too. Doing nothing, almost 28-foot seas. Monday morning, a little tiny area of 30-foot seas aimed north Monday night, and continuing maybe 31-foot seas, something like that, into Tuesday, and then fading from there. This system beyond that all fetch aimed southeast at Antarctica. So maybe a little pulse of swell to result from that, maybe a week out for Hawaii and 8 days or 9 days for the mainland. And then after that, it looks pretty quiet. We know there is potentially a trough forming in this area, but in terms of anything, winds getting traction on the ocean surface, nothing on the models yet. Quick look at the South Atlantic. Here we are currently. We're just going to roll this out. Another gale pushes under. Now this one falling more southeast than pushing up the coast. Still sideband swell likely for Southeast Africa. More behind that, but looking not, and notice, look at that. That's a solid south falling 36-foot seas there. Again, sideband swell, but nothing direct and as vigorous as what we've seen. And that pattern continues. Oops, there we are. We're a week out. And off to the Indian Ocean, we're looking for anything really 28-foot seas or higher. Yeah, a little bit here on Tuesday night, Wednesday, the 21st of August for South Australia. Another system here. Now, this targeting Mentawais and the Bali area pretty well with 28-foot seas pushing into Thursday. Another one behind that with 36-foot seas Thursday into Friday and fading out. Nothing supercharged, but looks like a steady run of fun-size surf at least. And then in keeping with the theme of this video, a quick look at the North Pacific Jetstream right now. So here is Baja, California here, Pacific Northwest up into Alaska, Aleutian Islands here, Kamchatka, Kuril Islands, Japan here. We know there's a tropical system somewhere here being pushed along by the Jetstream and then up into the Bering Sea. We'll get into that in a minute. But you see a bit of a trough trying to organize. Now, in the northern hemisphere, it is the jet pushing to the south that helps create a counterclockwise flow aloft. Different poles produce the opposite, but same intended reaction. But that's a pretty pinched off trough. Of interest on Wednesday, notice this backdoor trough setting up off of Canada, falling south off the Pacific Northwest on Thursday, and then like a full, if this was winter, I'd go, this is a great snow producing type storm into Friday and Saturday, and then pushing over the San Francisco area and Tahoe into Saturday. That looks at least possible for cooler temperatures and maybe some weather. We'll have to see how that plays out. And then, but we still see in general the jet pretty far to the north. When it's down at consistently at 45 north, then we're starting to see what I would call a real transition to fall. It's still pretty early. I mean, August 15th is the earliest I've ever seen rideable swell result in Northern California from a recurving tropical system off Japan. So we're keeping our eyes on that. And in fact, let's go take a look. What is now Tropical Storm Ampil? I think I'm saying that correctly. Kamchatka, the Kuril Islands, Japan here. You can see it was a hurricane pushing up off Japan. This was on Friday night into Saturday and still at hurricane strength. And then as of late Saturday night, down to tropical storm strength, 55 knot winds, and continuing across forecast. This is into almost Monday morning with 50 knot winds. This here, you can't see it underneath, but says maximum seas are 28 feet, and that was back right in here somewhere. Whereas the wave model here suggests seas at 40.7 feet. The GFS model tends to overhype this because it doesn't have as high a resolution. The grid squares are bigger, so it assumes the fetch is actually larger than it is. So I'd say the 40 feet is probably on the high side. I mean, I guess I could have gone and looked at the altimetry data, but I didn't. But maybe we get a pass over here and get some data. Anyway, let's look at the track of where it is, because there's also, or where it's going. You can see it heading off to the Aleutian Islands near the date line as we get into Monday evening, and then of no interest. That said, swell is forecast into the Hawaiian Islands and Northern California. We're talking very small swell, more like a novelty swell, waist high, chest high sort of thing. But hey, swell is swell. You take what you can get. The other thing, though, the GFS model is teasing at is look right down in here in Tuesday into Wednesday as we get into Thursday. 1, 2, 3 tropical systems that might be a bit overhyped, and then 2 of them start rotating around each other. The other one heads off to the west, targeting Hawaii with seas, multiple 30 feet, and then another system south of Japan. I mean, all this looks a little bit too good to be true. Whoops, we'll go right there with yet another system behind there. The GFS a week out on tropical system is purely fantasy land. I don't believe any of this, but it is fun to look at, fun to tease ourselves. We'll have to see what really happens. So what does all this mean in terms of actual surf? Here's the surf forecast in feet mapped out for the next week. You can see surf heights 2 feet, 1.5 feet. I mean, really not a whole lot going on. Maybe coming up a little bit next weekend. Let's go take a look at actual swell sizes. 1 foot at 12 seconds mixed in with wind swell. Another, 1 foot at 11 seconds. So this is just residual fading southern hemi swell. This isn't even showing that longer period swell that's hitting today, but that will continue. That will be dribbling off as we get into Monday and Tuesday, and then more this background 1.2 feet at 13 seconds, just background swell basically. And then the models are suggesting some sort of a 1.5 to 2 foot swell from 12 seconds on Saturday, Sunday. That is likely tropical swell from those systems we saw, so that's all in fantasy land too. So not a whole lot going on, at least for the Santa Cruz and San Francisco area in terms of surf. We go down south to the Dana Point area, the same sort of profile, surf a little bit bigger, a little bit better southerly exposure, 2 feet, 2.5 foot surf, then building to the 3.9 to 4 foot range. Here, I'll just pull it down so you can see that right there. Swell sizes, though, again, so here is the residual southern hemi swell that we're getting right now, 1.3 feet at 15.5 seconds, late Sunday into early Monday sort of thing, and then fading 1.6 feet at 13 to 14 seconds on Tuesday. And that's probably as good a proxy for Santa Cruz as well. The model sort of underhypes it a little bit. Then not a whole lot going on. And then supposed some tropical swell, 3.3 feet at 12 to 13 seconds next weekend for south-facing exposed breaks in Southern California. But again, buyer beware. It's way too early to believe any of that yet. South shore of Oahu, building southern hemi swell from a tiny gale off of New Zealand. Surf heights to 3 feet as we get into Monday, and then fading into Tuesday, and then not a whole lot after that. Let's go look at the details. Here we go. Peak size 2.1 feet at 14.5 seconds. That's about right, given I think seas were 25 feet, and you normally get like a 14, 15 second period swell out of that. So, and then that should provide surf for Monday into Tuesday on the South Shore. Maybe another little pulse of some background energy, 1.3 feet at 16 seconds. Oh, from the northwest. So this is actually, I'd have to show the Waimea Bay forecast, but little bits of swell. This is the incoming swell from Tropical Storm Ampil, assuming that this is all accurate and the sea heights are accurately modeled. And that same swell pushing into Northern California probably on Saturday of next week. Okay, and then things fading from there. And just for fun, Jeffreys Bay, 27-foot surf theoretically tonight. raw, stormy conditions indeed. 20-knot winds out of the northeast, and then fading 30-knot winds, 30, 40-knot winds, pretty messy, and surf size fading out from there. Looking at the details, 18 feet at 14 seconds, that's pretty, when the sea height is higher than the period, you know you're in trouble. Pretty raw situation, but some protected breaks, I'm sure, are going to be able to get some surf and rideable waves out of this. And then it looks like more like a wind swell pattern than a groundswell pattern. And finally, Bali, a good proxy for the whole Indonesian surf area. Surf height's 15 feet, fading to 5 feet, back up to 13 feet, fading down. Bali, of course, much further away from the fetch area, allowing the swell time to get groomed, to sort of sort itself out and push in cleanly to the coast. Swell size is 9 feet at 16 seconds, dribbling down to 4.5 feet at 12 seconds. I'd take that right now. I'd be perfectly happy. Then back up to 7.2 feet at 16 seconds, slowly fading down from there. So basically a whole week of nonstop surf. Wish I was there. And then finally, the backpackers temperature forecast for the intersection of Tioga Pass Road in Yosemite National Park with the Pacific Crest Trail. At that intersection, the height is about 8,700 feet, so that is that line right there. And this shows you the temperature at various elevations from 500 feet on up to about 14,000 feet. What catches my eye is the red line. This is 32 degrees, freezing temperatures, almost reaching that intersection on Friday, sometime Friday night into early Saturday morning. That would be the 23rd to 24th of August. But other than that, 50 to 60 degree temperatures before and after. No big hot spell, but this burst of cold air, likely from that upper level, that trough that's supposed to be pushing down the U.S. West Coast. So something to be mindful if you're up there in the mountains. Maybe some rain to result from that as well. All right, let's go take a look long term. What's going on with the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, and the El Nino Southern Oscillation? These two oscillations are the major oscillations that affect weather and storm, and therefore surf production in both the north and southern hemispheres. We're going to start first with the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. There are two phases to it, the active phase and the inactive phase. They are both in play around the planet at the same time. The active phase on one side of the planet, the inactive phase on the other. They rotate west-east around the planet on the equator. The active phase is the good one in terms of supporting storm production. The inactive phase, the opposite. The active phase is a low-pressure system. So effectively, it's a low-pressure system that rotates around the planet from west to east. When it pushes over the Pacific Basin, what it does is it takes warm, moist air that's down at the ocean's surface, lifts it aloft. When it does that, that energy gets imparted to the jet stream. It energizes the jet stream and therefore helps feed storm production down in the southern hemi in our summer or in the northern hemisphere in the winter. Also, because it's a low-pressure system and it's in the tropics, wherever it is, it feeds tropical storm development. So that's something to look for if you live in the near the equator. The inactive phase of the MJO does the exact opposite. It's a high-pressure system. It cuts off the flow of energy to the jet stream and dampens storm production. Now, we have data from the TAO buoy array, a series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino, but there's wind sensors on those buoys. And I am happy to report that in this section now, the buoys, they've been down, they've been struggling. There is a project underway to replace all the buoys across the entire equatorial Pacific, and this section appears just came online. We have much more data now. I can't wait to get out here because this is the most important area of the Pacific in terms of feeding the jet stream. I call it the Kelvin wave generation area. So 0 is the equator. This is the East Pacific. This is the West Pacific. That's New Guinea. The date line is right there. It's that area from just west of the date line, 170 west, over to as far west in the Pacific as you can get. When the active phase of the MJO, that low pressure system, moves over this area, that's when it starts imparting energy to the jet stream, and then downstream from there, the jet stream really starts raging and doing its thing in terms of supporting storm development. Now, you can tell by looking at not the actual winds, well, even the actual winds, what's sort of going on MJO-wise. Is the active phase in the Pacific or is it not? So we're looking here at the East Pacific. We're just looking at the arrows. Trades pretty strong out of the east. Okay, that's not great news. We get over the Central Pacific, strong east trades. Over the Kelvin wave generation area, strong east trades. Not super impressive. But it is not the actual wind speeds. It is the anomalies. The difference from normal for this time of year. Are the trades blowing stronger on average or weaker than average? That's how you can tease out the presence of either the active or the inactive phase of the MJO. In the East Pacific here, the arrows minimal, very weak out of the east, so no hope there. Looking over the Central Pacific, kind of a neutral pattern, but when you get into the all-important Kelvin wave generation area and look at all just this wall of easterly anomalies, not super strong, but strong enough to suggest that probably the inactive phase of the MJO is in control. That's just guessing. Let's go look at a forecast. Here's the forecast and Hindcast from the GFS model for the entire planet for either easterly or westerly anomalies. So you can sort of tell where the active phase of the MJO is. The date line, pull this down just a little bit. There we go. Date line is 180 west right there. This is the whole planet on one chart. So that's the date line in the Central Pacific. The far west Pacific starts about 125 east, so right there. The blues are easterly anomalies, synonymous with the inactive phase of the MJO, high pressure. So, and here is today, easterly anomalies. Looks like the inactive phase over the Pacific or over the West Pacific at a minimum, and you can see it slowly seeping eastward over the next 2 weeks, and if anything, getting stronger over the dateline 2 weeks from now. Whereas a persistent westerly wind pattern is over the Indian Ocean and south of Africa. This suggests not only the active phase probably in that area, but maybe also this the El Nino La Nina situation. We'll get into that a bit more in a minute. But suffice it to say, the El Nino La Nina situation is not just a Pacific thing. It is a planetary oscillation. Since the active phase of the MJO is a low pressure system and it takes moisture from down the ocean surface and lifts it aloft, not just in the Pacific, but wherever it is. And remember, the MJO moves west to east on the equator, and it's pretty much nothing but oceans the whole way around the planet on the equator. So this chart depicts the presence of more or less clouds than normal in the upper atmosphere. Okay, they call it outgoing long-wave radiation. Fancy words for cloud cover. Outgoing long-wave radiation, if you have the sun, it beams through the atmosphere, bounces off the ocean surface, reflects back out into space. But if you have more clouds than normal, less of that radiation escapes, and you get these blue colors, these negative anomalies. So you see blue there. One would go, well, that's probably where the active phase is. And the yellows are the opposite. More sunlight escaping, meaning cloud-free skies, inactive phase. And let's get ourselves oriented here. South America, Central America, New Guinea, equator right there, dateline right there, the all-important Kelvin wave generation area right there, inactive phase in control of the Pacific, with the active phase, no big surprise, over Africa into the Indian Ocean, where all the storm activity is right down here. All makes sense now. A week from now, or actually 5 days from now, same pattern, inactive phase getting weaker. 6 to 10 days from now, inactive phase finally fading, and 2 weeks from now, the active phase fading as it pushes towards the Pacific with nothing. That is per a statistic model. The dynamic model suggests basically the same thing, but allows the active phase to make some entrance into the West Pacific 2 weeks from now. Next up, phase diagrams, another way to drill into where the active phase of the MJO actually is. So what's this chart do? It tells you where the active phase is and how strong it is. So how do you read this? Well, the MJO moves from west to east, from the Indian Ocean to the Maritime Continent, to the West Pacific to the East Pacific, under the United States, across Africa, back to the Indian Ocean. The heavy dot right there is where the active phase is, so almost in the central Indian Ocean. The further the dot is away from this circle, the stronger the active phase is. So that's kind of a weak to modest active phase of the MJO. We really want to see this thing over here in the West Pacific relative to storm production in the Pacific. If you're into tracking Atlantic hurricanes, you'd want to see it somewhere over here, and the further away from the circle, the stronger it is, and the better it is at supporting tropical storm development. All right, so here is the forecast track, 3 different members, all having it somewhere in the central maritime continent, so near Bali, 2 weeks from now, and exceedingly weak. That from the statistic model. The dynamic model predicts basically the same thing, but the active phase being a little bit stronger. Another upper level model showing areas favorable for precipitation. The greens, wet air. One can loosely associate that with the active phase. The oranges and reds, the inactive phase. So we see the inactive phase over the East Pacific seeping into the Atlantic. The active phase pushing from Africa over Africa and into the Indian Ocean. We know where all the storm production is, same thing in this area here. And you can literally see the active phase making its way around the planet over the next 40 days from the Indian Ocean into about the end of August. I'm just looking at the dates over here. Over the Pacific, beginning of September, the whole way through September, and then pushing back or into the Atlantic. This is a big red X here for hurricane development in the Atlantic come early to mid-September sort of thing, as the inactive phase pushes over Africa in early September and into the Indian Ocean later in September. All right, back to the east-west component of the wind. This model goes out a month. It's from the CFS model. Yet another model is the dynamic model. You use different models. Not one model always tells you the truth, especially when you're looking out a month or two. You want to compare and contrast multiple models, have multiple sources of data, and then sort of try to draw an average line between them to get a sense of what's going on. All right, so this is past performance here. This is the forecast down here. The date, this is the whole planet on one chart, date line running right up the middle again. The blues are easterly anomalies, the inactive phase, oranges and reds, westerly anomalies, the active phase. In fact, the MJO right here, the black line is indicated. There is the last active phase of the MJO. Notice tropical development clustered around it. Not necessarily, though. You see some develop on their own, but the MJO helps to sort of put a little extra juice on the fire. Anyway, here's the forecast now. Easterly anomalies in control. Oh, the Pacific starts 125 east, so right there, date line right there. Pacific, pretty much the Kelvin wave generation, full of easterly anomalies, pretty strong for the next week and a half, and then weakening some, but solid, locked over the date line for the next month. And I say never believe a model that goes out a week, but here we're going to go look at out a model that goes out 3 months. The CFS model actually does, believe it or not, a reasonably good job of that. This is the forecast here. This is past performance here. This is the same thing. The blues, easterly component of the wind. The oranges and yellows, westerly component. The date line runs right up the middle, right there. Far west Pacific starts about 125 east, so right there. And you just get the sense, here's our easterly anomalies in active phase. And you see the active phase trying to build into the Pacific, or at least that's what one could guess by looking at this, come about early September, something like that, but it only makes it about halfway into the Pacific to about 165 east, doesn't even make it to the date line, and just gets the top ripped off of it with easterly anomalies in control. Let's overlay the MJO. Here is our current inactive phase of the MJO, locking down the Pacific. Here we are today. The last bits of the previous active phase are somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, under the southwest United States, something like that. But as we get, here comes the next active phase of the MJO developing over the Indian Ocean, pushing its way across and then into the Pacific, starting about the first week in September, and then continuing, taking a very lazy trip the whole way across the Pacific into middle of November, dragging westerly anomalies with it across the Pacific, but only making it halfway. Why is that? All right, so this is the beginnings of the El Nino La Nina discussion, and again, it is not just a Pacific thing, it is a global thing. We're going to overlay the low pass filter, and this is just a filter that sort of says, is pressure generally higher or lower than normal for this time of year? The solid contour here, a low pressure bias. And if you go back to April of this year, you see the low pressure bias was between the date line and south of California. This was El Nino, what they call El Nino in the Pacific. But now you see the low pressure bias is setting up over the Indian Ocean. And this then in turn allows high pressure. You see it starting to build over the Pacific right here. It actually stalled here about 2 weeks ago and is not forecast to come back until September, about 25th, something like that. It was actually supposed to come back earlier, and it's sort of taking its time getting going. This is a good thing because the La Nina in the Pacific is literally average of high pressure versus low pressure being more dominant over the Pacific, especially over the date line. This brings in La Nina, but with one contour, barely two, this is a pretty weak La Nina, and with this model keep sort of holding off the development of even a single contour, that's a good thing. Also note that Tropical Storm Ampil is recurving off of Japan as we talk. That does not happen typically under La Nina conditions because you have the jet stream displaced off to the north, you have high pressure in control of the Pacific. So what this suggests is last winter's El Nino is still in play, at least over much of the upper atmosphere, and the Pacific, though not strongly biased to low pressure, is certainly not biased to high pressure at the minute. And that is a good thing. The longer that can hold off, the better. Because you see what's forecast here. The low pressure bias for whatever, the bulk of it really still is in the Indian Ocean. We're just in a transitional phase right now. Not only are we in a transitional phase between summer and we're not even really starting fall yet, but we're trying, this is when you start looking for that. But with the El Nino, La Nina thing, we know that a transition to a higher pressure regime is forecast for the Pacific. But typically, as you move into winter, you get lower pressure in the Pacific, like in the Gulf of Alaska over the North Dateline region. So we'll keep seeing how this plays out. But anyway, for now, cautiously, somewhat optimistic, but no doubt, La Nina is coming. The question is how strong and for how long. So now a deeper dive into the El Nino La Nina thing, and we're going to focus primarily on the Pacific Basin because that is where El Nino and La Nina seem to have their greatest footprint. That said, Australia gets a pretty good chunk of that too, but Australia, Southwest Pacific, they're all pretty much 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's all part of one interconnected system. The Pacific Ocean does not stand by itself alone, separate from the Indian Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean. That's why we're kind of, started to pull in more of a global view of things and see how all this is interconnected and how what happens in one part of the planet maybe takes away from what's happening in other parts of the planet and so on and so forth. All right, so data from the TAO buoy array. We're looking at water temperatures down in the ocean, down 100, 200, 300 meters. This is the West Pacific here. This is the East Pacific here. The same data from the TAO buoy array. Boom, 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 boom. These are all the anchor lines on those new buoys and upgraded sensors down in. You take the sensors and you take a model, fill in the gaps in between them, and you get a profile of the balance of hot and cold water in the Pacific. Warm water in the West Pacific here, cold water in the East Pacific, or colder water. more of a normal type of pattern. The 30 degrees centigrade isotherm, and by the way, I can't wait to see this portion of the array wake up and get all filled in at some point. That'll be great. Wish we would have had it for this past El Nino, but we didn't. 30-degree isotherm, where it was last week, pushing to the date line, not an inch further. The 29-degree isotherm, same thing at 170 west. The 28-degree isotherm hovering right around 162 west, meaning warm water in the west. The 24-degree isotherm, it was actually, I think, at 105 last week, backtracking some to 113, maybe 114 west, suggesting maybe a little bit cooler water than cooler water than has been lately here in the East Pacific, but nothing too radical. Then we look down. This is anomalies, the difference from normal for this time of year. So that's the actual temperatures. But how do these compare to quote-unquote normal? Well, we did have a massive area of very cold water here a week ago. It's moderated in the past day or two. Is that really true? Well, we got some data here, but we have no data between here and here. So I'd say this is more the model just sort of making stuff up and trying to get a handle on things. With, oh, look at this, there's no sensors up in here either, with a lightly warmer regime here. This data all pretty solid though, only 1 degree, maybe 1.5 degree anomalies, warmer than normal anomalies in the west. Why is that? Well, if you have high pressure and a building La Nina pattern, the trades are going to increase sweeping across the equator, taking warm water here in the East Pacific, all smashing it over into the West Pacific and holding it in place there so it can't retrograde backwards. So this is one set of data, but we know there's still some corrupt and some suspicious issues going on here. We have another set of data that uses a satellite and the buoys that we just looked at to fill in the gaps. This probably paints a more accurate picture. A lot of warm water here in the west, building warm pool in the west, colder than normal temperatures in the East Pacific from 150 west on the whole way to Ecuador, basically. Colder than normal temperatures, upwelling Kelvin wave erupting, no big surprise. That only feeds colder than normal temperatures building at the surface, prevents evaporation, supports the buildup of high pressure aloft, which then feeds trades, which then starts reinforcing the La Nina cycle in the Pacific Basin. Here is the satellite data used to capture not sea surface or subsurface temperatures, but the height of the sphere of the ocean. Chile, Peru, Ecuador, South America, equator, the dateline, Hawaii up here, New Guinea down here. Take the satellite data. Takes about a week for the satellite polar orbit to go the whole way around the planet, capture every square inch of the ocean. Then you strip out the wave heights from it, the wind waves from it, even the tides, and you get a sense of where is the ocean higher or lower than normal. And we're only talking a couple of centimeters, this much, okay? Minus 10 centimeters between the Galapagos and out towards the dateline. That suggests there's a dip in the ocean surface. That means cold water at depth contracts. When it contracts, it creates a dip on the ocean surface. Likewise, warm water at depth expands, displaces the ocean up above it. We have higher than normal anomalies, 0 to 5, not really high, but slightly elevated anomalies here near New Guinea, slightly decreased anomalies on the equator in the East Pacific, all indicative of some sort of a weak La Nina type pattern. The balance of warm and cold waters in the Pacific over the past year, there's the West Pacific here, East Pacific here. Back in September of last year, 2023, Kelvin waves, warm water, driven by El Nino, driven by weaker than normal trades, pushing into the East Pacific, building our what turned out to be just a moderate El Nino pattern. And then somewhere in the November-December timeframe, the warm pool was entirely tapped out. Then we started getting cold water Kelvin waves, 1, 2, 3, and now number 4 pushing across the Pacific. This latest push seems like it's probably reached its peak. You even see signs of little bits of warming. I mean, nothing super strong, but at least we're past the major pulse, we think, of La Nina. All right, let's go see what's going on surface-wise. Sea surface temperature anomalies, difference from normal for this time of year. South America, Central America, Hawaii, equator right here, dateline roughly right here. We see, well, we know there's a global warming signature going on. You can see it. These are in the ocean. The ocean is, not nearly as variable as the atmosphere. But you also see cooler than normal waters building here. This is that subsurface cool pool trying to erupt to the surface in this area, then getting caught by trades and pushing across, though the bulk of the coldness seems out here. It's not eastward displaced, it's westward displaced, suggesting a weaker La Nina pattern, at least for the moment, than you typically would see. That's, again, another sign of weakness in La Nina, I think, given this early date. We'll see how this all plays out. But for now, this was actually, it seemed a little bit stronger a couple of days, seems to be weakening some. The 7-day trend, you see almost a balance of warming temperatures and cooling temperatures from Ecuador on out to about 160 west. Hawaii is right there. It's only 5 degrees north and south of the equator that any of this matters. What's going on up here, what's going on down here, for the most part, has no bearing. For whatever reason, it's all about the equatorial pattern. This is where the MJO, it organizes here in the Indian Ocean, pushes across the maritime continent, across the Pacific, and then across the Atlantic, fading. By the time it makes it across Africa, there's nothing left. Then it hits the big pool of warm water here, regenerates, and does another loop. Takes about 4 to 6 weeks for the MJO, either active or inactive phase, to make it from here over to here. So, and I don't know how long it takes to go the whole way around the planet. It takes a while, but typically, it's a 4 to 6 week travel across the Pacific. Then a quick look at the overview here. Again, same sort of pattern. Yeah, the cool pool losing a little bit of its footprint here in the equatorial Pacific as compared to last week. Sea surface temperature anomaly history in the Nino 1.2 region. This is the area right there by Ecuador and the Galapagos, sort of an early indicator of what's going on if systems or if the if El Nino is eastward displaced. Temperatures today, 491 thousandths of a degree below normal, half a degree below normal. You have to be, for La Nina, and this isn't even in this area, but the general thought is half a degree below normal for 5 consecutive 3 months period. So basically 5 months in a row. We've been in the half to 1 degree range here for the most part for a good while now, but this isn't the official region. The Nino 3.4 is, and you can see only in the beginning of July mid-July did we start to go negative. Today's value, I'll pull it up here, 329 thousandths of a degree, a third of a degree below normal. Notice the scale is different here. So not even in La Nina territory yet. Pretty much neutral, biased, a little bit colder. So no big barn buster La Nina developing, at least for the moment. The official weekly temperature anomaly indicator or readings for the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino area, that is the area on the equator, 5 degrees north and south of the equator, from a point south of California, 120 west, out to about the dateline, 170 west. Temperatures, well, there we go. For August 7th, dead zero. Last week, the week ending July 31st, we were down 0.2 of a degree, but we have been hovering right around zero now since May. So that's May to June to July to August now, almost 3 months hovering right at zero. Prior to that, you can see we were up at, 2.1 degrees in these weeks in November and into December, the peak of El Nino. So right at the top edge of medium moving into, or of strong El Nino territory moving into super El Nino, but never made it. That was just based on sea surface temperatures. But now, dead even. We're not even in La Nina territory yet. So what does the atmosphere think is going on? We have warmer than normal oceans. We got a little pool of cool water there. We think we're still in the hangover mode from El Nino. We're seeing evidence of that with the recurvature of Tropical Storm Ampil off of Japan, and this persistent southwest New Zealand swell pattern relative to our southern hemi summer swell development pattern, all indicative of the fading or the hangover from El Nino. Let's go look in the atmosphere. We look at the difference in pressure between Tahiti, which is in the Pacific, we'll call it the equatorial Pacific, and Darwin, roughly in the Indian Ocean. When pressure is lower in Tahiti, again, that low pressure bias that we talked about early, then the index would go negative. Well, today it's plus 21, but a couple of days ago it was negative. We'll just go back here and look at negative, weekly positive, negative, sort of bouncing all in between, but in large, I'd say more balanced, even just the past month in the negative range. In fact, we can look here at the 30-day average, minus 5.66, and you can see we were down at minus 9, 10. Then we were neutral for a little bit, but in general, the sense is we're still not, at least by these values, anywhere near La Nina. The 90-day average, looking back 3 months, we're still at minus 3.49. Where were we a month ago? About the same as where we are now. The atmosphere not showing any clear indications that it's firmly moving into La Nina. The ocean's not showing that either. Subsurface is probably the key, though. You look down there and you see a pretty, that good cold water Kelvin wave type, upwelling Kelvin wave type event in play, suggesting we're heading there, but the ocean and the atmosphere are not coupled. They are not working hand in glove at the moment. Let's go take a look at a graph of this data. Here's the 30-day running average graphed out. You can see the downward spikes are the active phase of the MJO. The upward spikes are the inactive phase. Neutral, well, here's 0 in the middle. This goes back to June of, or even May of 2022 when we were in La Nina. The blue is La Nina. Now the La Nina in the Pacific is the exact opposite in the Indian Ocean. It's a low pressure bias in the Indian Ocean. It's a lot of rain, it's floods, it's lots of surf, all that sort of thing. And then when you move into El Nino like we did here, but you see not very strongly, not very solidly. We were at 20, hovering at 20 there, but we barely hit 20 once during this El Nino, suggesting, well, it wasn't a very strong El Nino. And you see, even today, we are still just sort of bouncing around in neutral territory. Haven't moved fully back into La Nina. I'll take it any day of the week. Sea surface temperature anomaly forecast for the Nino 3.4 region from the CFS version 2 model. It has been continuously showing this just precipitous drop off a cliff in August, with temperatures going to -5 down to -1 degree in, that'd be September, and then down to -1.5 degrees, which is, so that would be a weak La Nina. This would be a moderate La Nina in the fall time frame. But my guess is this is a bit overhyped. We'll see, because if I say it too loud, we'll probably jinx it. So knock on wood or knock on your computer, whatever you want to knock on. Hope this doesn't materialize. I think the CFS model has overhyped it. In fact, this version of the model has for sure. Here's the PDF corrected one. It shows still the same precipitous drop, but temperature is only going down to about -1.15, which is still moderate La Nina, but more on the weaker side of that. I just went to go look to see there is a consensus model of all, there's like 30 different El Nino, La Nina models like this, and they all make their different predictions of what sea surface temperatures are going to be like in the Pacific. It has not updated. I think it's going to update probably tomorrow. That would be, or 2 days from now. So that'd be like Tuesday the 20th. That's typically either the 19th or the 20th is when it does it. So, but last time we looked, every time we look, it is something less dramatic than even what the CFS model is showing, the PDF corrected version. So, we'll see where we're at. Next week, we'll have the video, so we can dive in. We'll dig into that a little bit. But for right now, things looking not too horrible. So zooming out right now, small southern hemi swell is hitting the California coast, but nothing to write home about, just rideable. Another gale has developed, well, a gale did develop next to New Zealand about a week ago. Small swell from that is working its way into Hawaii as we speak. Another gale is forecast in the next 2 days off of New Zealand, yet again an indicator of the lingering El Nino pattern in the atmosphere, typical of the year after an El Nino winter. So maybe some hope for more small southern hemi swell from that. A little bit of perhaps swell from Tropical Storm Ampele pushing into Hawaii. I think it's midweek, and then into California. Exposed breaks north of Point Conception late in the work week into the coming weekend. But I mean, it purely novelty surf again. Nothing to write home about. We're in the doldrums. We're waiting for the beginnings of fall. The summer pattern, or the down south winter pattern in the southern hemi, is fading for sure. We're seeing that. But we haven't got a clear sign of any part of the North Pacific jet stream making a dive to the south, and I have a feeling it's going to be a while till that happens. That said, it appears El Nino is still lingering in the atmosphere as we were hoping for, so when the fall pattern does arrive in the North Pacific, it will get a little boost from the lingering remnants of El Nino, last year's El Nino. And that should do us well to hopefully keep us moving surf-wise into at least December, maybe early January. And then we'll have before then, I'm sure as we get into October, November, we'll have a much better handle on what's really going to go on with this developing La Nina. Though we all are hoping it will be short and not very strong. And that rainfall-wise, that we end up with at least something approaching normal this winter to top off the reservoirs. So they all look to be in pretty good shape. All right, if you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and ring the bell. Comments, questions, always welcome. And if you'd like to make a special contribution, you can hit the super thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. And again, thanks to all those that have donated. We do not do Patreon. We do not try to sell you stuff. You know, if you want to donate, you can. If you don't, enjoy it for free. You're all welcome to. This is for fun and for us to enjoy, and to hopefully get us all a little bit smarter on how our planet is interconnected weather-wise and surf-wise. And with that, we are done for this week. We will do it again next week, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching.